Very good morning, selamat pagi, Excellency Ambassador Dino Patijalal, Excellency Ambassador Sandip Chakraforty, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen. It's truly an honor for me to stand before you today at the Jakarta Future Forum 2024, a gathering that epitomizes the convergence of innovation, foresight, and collaborative spirit. As we delve into the theme of synergizing digital transformation, unlocking potential innovation, and seizing digital economy opportunities, we embark on a journey of exploration, one that navigates the intricate landscape of technological advancement and its profound impact on our global society. At this auspicious juncture, allow me to convey utmost appreciation to the foreign policy community of Indonesia, the Observer Research Foundation, and the Embassy of India in Jakarta for the excellent arrangement of this event. In this era of digital transformation, we know that the potential for innovation knows no bounds. Yet, it is imperative that we harness this potential effectively, steering our collective effort towards the creation of ecosystems that foster ingenuity and empowerment. In light of this, the Indonesian Ministry of Communications and Informatics, MCI, plays an instrumental role in laying the essential building blocks to foster an inclusive, empowering, and trusted digital transformation. Within the last 10 years, the MCI has laid out such building blocks that comprises of robust digital infrastructure with diverse modes of technology, whether it is base transceiver station, satellite, fiber optics, to provide accessible, affordable, and reliable connectivity across our archipelagic nation. The second one is the people's digital literacy and skills that have been continuously nurtured to empower every Indonesian to thrive in digital era. The third building block is the vibrant digital economy ecosystem that foster inclusive and sustainable growth while ensuring fair playing field for all. And the last one is concerted efforts among various government agencies to strengthen digital government as well as to enhance quality of public services. Ladies and gentlemen, digital technology becomes the backbone that underpins growth. This notion was well understood not only by private but also public sector. It is a good thing. I would like to share an experience from our effort to do the digitalization in public sector. It is a good thing that every government agencies put a lot of efforts in digitalizing public services. However, we learned that decentralized digital agenda also has consequences. In this context, we learned that every government agencies has its own digitalization programs, making inefficiency and redundancy inevitable. You know, we're struggling with a number of data centers, not less than 2,700 data centers or so-called data centers, owned by more than 600 government agencies, as well as 27,000 public service applications, both at national and subnational levels. In pursuit of a synergized digital transformation, MCI strives to further consolidate digital policies and agenda across government agencies. In the context of government data center, for example, it is agreed that the government applies moratorium on development of new government data center and assigns MCI to provide government data centers. We also do what we call budget clearance for national spending on data center, data-related infrastructure, and generic applications. The lesson learned is that it is expected that such concerted efforts will improve the effectiveness and efficiency of Indonesia's digital government. This also applies for the next big agenda, the digital public infrastructure, Indonesia's DPI. We have digital ID, we have digital payment, we have data sharing policies, but all are separate initiatives. The challenge would be to integrate those distinct initiatives, whether it is to streamline government services, facilitate transactions, or enable seamless data exchange. Again, without concerted efforts and cooperation among related institutions, that would not be materialized. I think the same notion also applies for bilateral, multilateral, and regional cooperation, whether it is to facilitate cross-border transaction, knowledge and skill exchange, or innovation ecosystem development. However, it is crucial for us to understand that on one hand, there is a need for some sort of standard or interoperability to bridge different systems. But on the other hand, we need to provide an avenue for flexibility to cater to diverse characteristics and diverging approaches. How we strike a balance to get the most of both worlds is the true challenge. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the journey towards digital transformation in our book is one of collaboration, innovation, and empowerment. I am hopeful that this event would fuel our collective effort in unlocking potential innovation and seizing digital economy opportunities. By harnessing the collective wisdom of our global community, including through dialogue among bright minds like of our speakers today, let us create a brighter and more prosperous digital future for all. I thank you, and I wish you a fruitful and enriching discussion. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It's my great pleasure to welcome you for the first panel of today, and thank you very much for finding your time and energy to join us quite early in the day. So today I have the pleasure to moderate this wonderful panel titled Synergizing Digital Transformation, Unlocking Potential Innovation and Seizing Digital Economic Opportunities. As I've been already introduced, but I will just remind you, my name is Pavlina Pavlova. I do career research at New America in Washington, D.C. at the intersection of data and gender. But today we'll be speaking about DPIs, digital public infrastructures, with the wonderful lineup of panelists we have here. So we will start with Olivier Crespa, Program Director at the Center for Finance, Technology and Entrepreneurship in the UAE. Welcome.
Thank you, Pavlina.
We also have Johannes Lukiman, Chair of the E-Commerce Committee for Digital Indonesian Employers from the Indonesian Employers Association. Welcome. We'll then continue with Mark Robinson, Founder and CEO Alliance Pro Digital Singapore. Very warm welcome to you. And of course, we'll have our last speaker, Anuleka Nandi, Fellow from Observer Research Foundation based in India. As we already introduced our topic, let's delve more into it. Digital public infrastructures refer to digital systems, platform, and technologies, quite a variety of things designed to serve the people at large. At its core, they play three foundational roles, mediating the flow of people, the flow of money, and the flow of information. And with this, I wanted to start with Anuleka. I turn to you with the first question. India has been a pioneer in developing foundational DPIs. What impact has DPI India stack had on digital transformation and innovation? How you assess the success in your home country? And what are the lessons learned for other countries and for this region specifically?
Thank you, Pavlina. And as you rightly said, that India was the first country to kind of develop all the three components of DPIs. And it's an India story. It is a global South story in many ways. And now we have DPIs as a part of the global development agenda with the G20 presidency declaration declaration of the G20 presidency, as well as, the UNDP campaign on 50 and 5, with 50 countries developing at least one component of DPI in 5 years. So it's very much a fulcrum of, becoming a fulcrum of global development. But I just wanted to emphasize that, the DPIs weren't built in a day. It took years and decades of iterative solutioning for some of the country's more systemic issues, kind of increasing access to social protection, kind of doing public distribution systems, making them more efficient, and also doing better direct benefit transfers, at the heart of which was the need for a verifiable identity framework. And therein came the Aadhaar, a foundational digital identity system. And that led to the development of, that made or enabled the development of digital payment systems, or the unified payment interface that we have in India. And it reduced the cost of KYC to the extent from around $25 to a few cents, and reduced transaction costs, search costs, to the extent that it enabled to bring more companies into the fold. It enabled kind of domestic companies to kind of innovate on top of this, to kind of emerge as one of the largest unicorns in this space. And the third component, kind of having that consent artifact, essentially to ensure more trustworthy flow of data within the system, kind of tied all these three components together. And over the years, we've seen kind of development of more open standards and protocols. We have the open source identity platform, or MOSIP, and the open network for digital commerce, the open credit enablement network. And each of them kind of providing tools and modalities for other countries to kind of develop their DPI components. MOSIP, I think, is used by 7 countries, with 9 more on the anvil. ONDC kind of helped, innovators kind of move away from being tied to aggregators like Uber, so that more fund flow. They could retain more of the fees. And also OSEN, which I mentioned, the credit enablement network, kind of helped small and medium enterprises get better access to credit, small ticket, small tenure loans, small working capital, and so on. So what we see is that there's this one radical innovation, which we see as Aadhaar, and kind of that leading to a more incremental innovation across different sectors, different areas of intervention. And I think that kind of highlights what we need in terms of national innovation policies, and how do we kind of spearhead from one foundational DPI component to kind of look at innovation and transformation in other sectors.
Thank you very much, Anulika. And before we go to Olivier with the next question, I just wanted to remind the audience, please have your questions ready. After the couple first rounds of questions from me to the speakers, I would love to open the floor to the audience so you can ask your questions, and we'll make it into more of a discussion and debate between the audience and the speakers. Let's go to Olivier. So DPIs have a key innovation element, as we also heard just now from Anulika. Given your focus on fintech, finance, technology intersections, including in various countries such as India, Indonesia, Vietnam, and the UAE, what are key trends you are seeing in the countries? And both, if you can compare national and regional perspectives, that would be very interesting. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much, Pavlina. And I'm going to add a little bit on what Anulika said, right? And I'm going to talk about experience. And I would say DPI is really critical. Without DPI, you cannot have digital banking, for example, right? Digital banking is very important for financial inclusion. So, and you can see 2 countries, particularly like India and Indonesia, a very big country, with over 200 million people in India. If you want to reach to them, right, you need digital infrastructure. And Indonesia is the same with 17,000 islands. How are you going to provide bank account, which is going to give financial freedom to people if you don't have digital public infrastructure? So India, as mentioned, has done a fantastic job with Aadhaar, right, which is a public infrastructure that has information about the people across the country. And they made in a way, obviously mandatory to everybody to have it. And also to have a bank account, you need to have Aadhaar. And that simplifies KYC because you can do remote KYC. The other thing they did, and there is something very similar in Indonesia, IKTP and Bukapil, which is similar to what Aadhaar is in India. Another thing they did for payment is a UPI. And UPI is absolutely extraordinary because it allows you to send payment, to aggregate bank account across banks. You can send to people payments through your phone. You can pay merchant. It's linked as well to QR code and so on. And one of the things I want to share on that on UPI, on the implementation. So it was done in India and it's a huge task. You can imagine to get every bank aligned. And they did it in a very short period of time. And I remember, and for that to happen, you need obviously a very strong support from the government. And you need a champion. And in India, there was a person called Nandan Nalekani. And I remember because I was there in, I think it was 2016, in April, he asked all the banks in the country to come, right? In April. And he asked all the banks in a room, and I was representing one of these banks, to stand up and to commit that they will be ready by July to implement UPI. Obviously, nobody was ready, but you can see the sense of urgency that he has created. And it has happened. Otherwise, it can take years, right? So that's, I think, one of the very important points I want to say. And in Indonesia, similar initiatives are happening as well. UPI is being tested, I think, in Surabaya and in Bali right now with very good success rate. And database infrastructure as well, and the sharing of information. So there is a lot of similarity. There is a lot of support. Based on this infrastructure, a lot of new things can happen, like digital banking, like being able to provide better service to people in a country and serve them better. And I think Johannes will talk on the e-commerce part as well, so I'm not going to go into more of that. But a lot of similarity, and I think a lot of alignment happening at the regional level right now.
Thank you very much, Olivier. Mark, let me turn to you as we continue with the financial aspects of DPIs. What is their role as an incentive to support regional innovation ecosystems, including startups? And what are the lessons learned in Singapore? What are the other comparisons with countries that you witnessed and you worked in? And what can be the lessons learned also in this region?
No, thank you. I think for startups, being incentivized to connect into DPIs is something that's going to be critical because the government and the underlying agencies can only push the DPI initiative so far. They do heavily need to rely on public and private sector initiatives to be able to really kick everything off and make it a truly incorporated initiative. What we saw in Singapore is obviously through the SingPass initiative is a very comprehensive government-led program where you can easily access all of your medical information. As soon as you land into Changi Airport, you're going to be able to pull up all of your information very quickly and make immigration very accessible. If you need to have access to your vaccine information, it's all there, all in one ecosystem, as well as on the banking and payment side of things as well. Adding a new bank account can be done now literally in a minute of minutes. But on top of that, the government is also providing a lot of initiatives for startups to be able to be integrated into these platforms. The reason why they're doing that is because if they're able to be tied into the DPI ecosystems, it also means cost of running business for a lot of these startups gets reduced. And for those familiar working in a startup type environment, every cost saving that you can be done, any efficiencies that can be made is very critical. And so the alignment between the government and startups in the fintech section especially has been pushed very aggressively, and they've seen a huge momentum and traction in getting a lot of these fintech related companies integrated into DPIs. Whilst it's beneficial obviously for the startups, it's also very beneficial from the government centralized data repository as well. Because what it does is it allows them to have further visibility around what is happening within the broader economy. And what that net ultimately means is that it allows them to have more data points to better service the broader economy further down the line. The more data sets that they have, the better they are to be able to adjust some of their economic policies in the future as well to better benefit the citizens. And so I think even though Singapore is a small country compared to Indonesia and India, they've done a very good job of data collection and using it to make sure that they're able to grow what's best for the citizens of the country. And I think as we continue to develop the DPI infrastructure, and I think we're going to talk about this later on around cross-border as well, but I think what that does is it really allows, from a centralized government perspective, to really be able to have true, accurate data of what's really happening within the ecosystem and act on that rather than more hearsay data or slightly outdated data.
Thank you very much, Mark. Before we go to the opening question to Johannes, I wanted to follow up on your points about, you mentioned a lot like government-led initiatives and the government push for DPIs, DPIs extension and just like rolling it out. What is the incentive for broader stakeholder engagement there? Like how would you map the key stakeholders, and what is some kind of enabler to make them work on more, with more partners? Is it only government-led that we know that there are others led by the private sector, maybe what are the advantages and disadvantages of both, and how to really incentivize the cooperation in different kinds of settings?
So I think ease of integration is key. So there's many open source initiatives that are being led globally. We already mentioned what's happening in India. The UN has their own open source initiatives as well around DPI infrastructure. If you're able to produce an integration method that is easily accessible, that's going to help encourage more and more people to be able to interact and connect into these systems. If you make it more complicated, then obviously costs are going to go up. And every time you increase costs, that means incentivization goes down. And so I think being able to encourage this whole ecosystem in an open source manner, which also allows for collaboration, you're going to end up with a much better product at the end of the day as well. We've seen on a number of initiatives in the past where they use open source as the key data set for development. You've actually seen a lot of innovation that you wouldn't have seen if it's just led by one or two individual companies that are trying to push their own individual products.
Thank you very much. Johannes, let's discuss our host country now, Indonesia. From e-commerce perspective, how has Indonesia's adoption of DPIs impacted the growth? What are the key challenges and opportunities you see as we go to the future that DPIs and their the inclusion into the societies, into the public sector is bringing to the country?
Sure. Thank you for the question. I think the implementation of DPIs has been a massive boon to growth of e-commerce in the country. You'll see that the major e-commerce players in Indonesia are no longer solely retail focused, but have started to embed or be interconnected with various services such as financial services, logistics, and other on-demand services that exist in Indonesia's ecosystem today. And that could not be done without the existence of DPI. So it's been great at triggering the interconnection of services and retail in Indonesia, yet at the same time, at the top end, now that we've reached sort of the exhaustion of what is possible with current DPI, it's also acting as a bottleneck. So let me give you an example. During the pandemic, the major e-commerce platforms were asked to help disperse stimulus to Indonesian consumers to keep the economy going. And how would we do that? We would do that through injecting a voucher to individuals to spend with specifically Indonesian manufacturers and retailers, so non-imported goods, so to keep the pure domestic retail and economy going. So what did we need to do? We needed to verify that A, this consumer was in fact an Indonesian, and that B, the seller was in fact an Indonesian domestic entity. Well, those are financial services related DPIs. We are a retail platform. So if I'm verifying a financial transaction, or if my embedded bank is lending to someone, yes, I can use FSDPI to verify identity. But in this case, I didn't have a lending institution attached to this particular transaction, so I was not able to use my API call to verify the identity of both buyer and seller. So we were very limited in what we could do. And in the end, this program called Bangga Buatan Indonesia pivoted to what I would say was less targeted, but still quite an effective program. So there's limitations now that the sort of commercial use cases have outgrown current regulations and DPI provided by the government. We need to take the next step forward. And I think a coordinated effort, like Bumira mentioned earlier, is underway, and I can't wait to see what the Indonesian government has in store for us under the new presidency.
Thank you very much. And we have the first round of questions covering more technical e-commerce, financial aspects of DPIs, but DPIs mean much more, and much more for the citizens. So what are the other aspects, what are the impacts of DPIs, whether existent or potential in the near future, for sectors such as healthcare, education, and government services? What are the case studies or applications you see in India, Anuleka? Can you explore that? Thank you.
Thanks, Pavlina. And what we see is India Stack with its three foundational components, right, of data, identity, and payments, kind of being the inspiration for similar initiatives in health, in education. We're looking increasingly at the health stack in India. Essentially, how do we expand universal health coverage under the digital mission, the Ayushman Bharat digital mission, by developing electronic patient records, by integrating claims and coverage to ensure that individuals have a seamless access to health. The experience of access to health is seamless at the last mile. To ensure that those records interoperate so that they are able to access healthcare at a facility and outlet of their choice. So, and similar programs are underway in the education sector, kind of developing digital IDs for education to kind of an academic credit bank per se, so that students have that academic credit history for when they are applying for further studies, for employment, etc. So to kind of make that journey, the student journey, the education journey, more seamless as well. So at the end of the day, DPIs kind of depend on their attributes and functions, their attributes of openness, of interoperability, of reusability, their functions of providing social value, of economic value, and how, as the transformative impact of DPIs kind of, propel forward, we kind of look at how these jointly together optimize or maximize public value in general across different sectors and across different areas of application.
Thank you very much. So maximizing social public value is a very important topic, and I hope that other panelists would like to explore. Olivier, do you have something to add?
No, I think the DPI infrastructure is the backbone of every kind of services. And from there you can build, right? All these digital identity, payment capabilities, and the data, they really go across, right? So after the imagination of what you can do is a limit, but this is really the core of what can be done. And one of the difference, and why is, when you say between public and private, sometimes is the good thing about public, they can make it mandatory. They can impose it, right, to the entire country. If it's private, you will end up having 5 different systems, and they will not connect to each other most of the time, right? And nobody will want to have one private to own everything, right? So for this area as well, particularly in data about citizen and so on, is definitely something that is important. But also one of the limitations we see right now is, whilst there is a lot of progress on at an individual level, for SME, for example, or enterprise, there is still a lot of work to be done in many countries. Like, for example, to have one registry of company, right? To have one credit bureau when you can get information about the people who are lending and so on. So this is a big limitation, and it's a little bit more complex, obviously. But it's very difficult, for example, to onboard SME digitally, because you cannot find one source of information, one registry, or very rarely, and it will not going to be completed. So I think it's the next area of focus that is probably needed on a DPI initiative.
The other area I think is very critical here is around the cybersecurity and fraud prevention side. Having a DPI ecosystem can help dramatically cut down a lot of this fraud that you continue to see in the modern world. And the fraudsters are getting more and more smarter as to how they're trying to get access into people's accounts and have access to data, whether it's from a government or on the private sector. Having this centralized login system and it being secured through government-related ecosystems will help prevent or certainly help mitigate a lot of the fraud activity. We've seen this firsthand in Singapore, where there's continuous fraud attempts on the bank. And Olivia, I'm sure in your banking career, you've seen a number as well. I think as security, government security, country security is getting ever more of a concern in the current economic environment, being able to control this and have this centralized login is going to become even more critical as we continue to move forward.
If you don't mind, I'd like to combine some of the points that were discussed by Mark and Olivier. So in Indonesia, unfortunately, we've taken a startup or organic approach to government e-services. So as Bumira mentioned, we've got several thousand data centers owned by different ministries. We've got tens of thousands of different government apps. And there's a direct correlation to how secure that information is. And to your point, Olivier, there needs to be a strong government mandate. All ministries and government institutions must adhere to this master plan. And so historically, there has been a lack of that master plan, but in the second term of the current presidency, indeed such a master plan was created, and I think pushing that into a single consolidated direction will be key. And that will unlock so much value, like the MSME financing that you mentioned. MSME financing is about, in my experience at least, knowing which parts of the value chain that the MSME is involved in are high risk and low risk. Now, you can't do that if the financial information and other data, like taxation data, for example, are fragmented. So if you bring all of these things together, so much more potential value can be unlocked, not only for the citizen themselves, but for the general economy.
Yeah, I think Johannes is absolutely right. The difficulty I think the government agency have is that how can you centralize the data but also keep some data segregated, right? So I think that, I believe, right, that, I don't know what you think about it, that maybe the solution is to implement blockchain, right, across the database so you can containerize and tokenize some of this information. So it can be centralized without giving full open access to everybody, just on a need to have access basis, maybe.
Anyone who's been in tech, I think, knows that database migration is one of the most painful things you can ever do. So before I hand it back to the moderator, I love your point about blockchain. Digital ledger is something that the Indonesian government and industry practitioners are thinking about a lot. We have an interesting use case where one of our investees, which is a tax payment company, uses blockchain for something that might in other countries be quite conventional, but for us is revolutionary, which is you actually get confirmation that your tax has been paid after the transaction has been closed. So for very many methods, let's say if you pay tax through your ATM, through your bank, via VA transfer or something like that, something comes out of the ATM, but it is not the government agency saying, yes, this is now fulfilled and clear. So there have been cases where you feel you've paid your tax, but the government institution says, no, you have not, right? And that leads to arrears. So this startup, which is also connected via API into our platform so our consumers can pay their taxes through their platform, has a blockchain ledger together with the Dirjen Pajak saying that, yes, you have indeed paid your tax, leading to much greater comfort and certainty. So I think we're sort of showing the way, and then through having a valid use case, hopefully also promoting adoption of what is still, I think, quite an, at least in government circles, untested technology.
Thank you very much for this information. And I hear a lot of points around cybersecurity connected to financial frauds and centralization of data, and maybe how new emerging tech and blockchain can protect this data to make it at the same time centralized but protected. But I wanted to use my right as a moderator for one question before we go to the audience to to explore more this intersection of data protection. When we centralize data, data protection is a big issue. And we mentioned how much data we need in one space to actually see the patterns, to make it very usable, to build on it. But at the same time, gathering data in one space can be very dangerous for people's private information, and can have very much real implications for their lives if this data gets exposed, misused, etc. So how do you see this intersection of data protection on one hand and on the other emerging technology? Is there some, are there some very promising solutions from emerging tech, including blockchain, which you kind of started to discuss with the data protection and having, can we have it all? Having data gathered and working for the societies and people at large and government, and at the same time having people ensure that their data is safe, secure, and will not be misused after this, after their data, personal data, is being collected.
Maybe I can try, right? So there are a lot of initiatives happening, and you know, like for example in Europe, GDPR, there is also here, right, where not only we need to ensure that the data is protected, but also to give more control on the citizen on the data that company have about them, right? To put back the customer or the citizen a little bit on a driving seat, and knowing what is the data that is being shared and so on. And also with a combination of what you mentioned previously with the blockchain to ensure that probably, you know, the data, because yes, as we mentioned before, right, to have one database with a billion of data information about people is a big risk. And to have also every government agency sharing and all their data across all the other government agencies creating an extra risk. So we need to balance this centralization and decentralization at the same time, and find the equilibrium with and new technology are happening as well. AI may be able to help on this area, right? By being able to kind of scrub into the data and be able to show what is really relevant and not everything.
And I think with the blockchains, I mean, obviously you can have private blockchains, you can have public blockchains. So depending on the type of data and the level of sensitivity, you can determine what level of public access certain parts of that data actually will be provided into. I think one of the benefits of the blockchain ecosystem is that you can't change it. Once it's on the blockchain, you cannot change that data. So as an individual, even if your information is on some type of blockchain ledger, you know that that information is going to be accurate at the time of posting, and that there's not going to be a third party that's going to be able to edit that information. So as we continue to progress into the digital age, and more applications and more services are going to be tied into not only DPI, but other private related ecosystems, if you're having this one centralized or decentralized data repository, you know that that information is going to be safe and it's not going to be manipulated by third parties.
I think picking on Anuleka's point, you know, when you want to create a massive centralized repository of citizen information, the key is not to have a big bang moment, right? You mentioned India's DPI had been built over a series of years. And this is one of those cases where moving slowly is good, right? I think as you integrate some of these siloed databases and fragmented databases into one, and do the appropriate API security testing and sort of the, you know, the audits and so forth, ITsec audits, you become comfortable with the security and you start to absorb more. I think moving at high speed in this instance would be one of the biggest risks. So we have to resist the private sector push to continually move faster and sort of say, okay, security first and then speed second, because in this case, being absolutely 100 or as sure as one can be of the security is paramount.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
And,
I just wanted
we
to
had a lot.
build on those points that we don't need one large database to rule them all, right? We just need different databases to speak to each other, essentially. Authenticate that the person is who they say they are, right? So it's just like when you apply, the system you apply for sends a call to the central database saying, is this the right person? And the database replies, yes. It doesn't need to kind of transfer all of the data it holds on that individual to the requesting entity. And India is exploring the account aggregator framework within which it's a consent management framework, so within which an entity kind of manages your consent to share your data to the required financial institutions and others. So I think there are ways that are being explored which kind of centers the user's consent at the heart of data sharing. And I think that's kind of vital going forward. So how do we have these consent management architectures to enable perhaps not one massive central database, but to ensure that the security measures are in place and different entities have control over the kind of databases that they are responsible for, but yet have a kind of framework wherein the different data sets sort of speak to each other. So that, I think, was one of the points that I wanted to emphasize.
Thank you very much. Consent, and importantly, informed consent. And I will definitely remember security first, speed second. But I wanted to open the floor to the questions, and I really hope that as our panelists were exploring the topic of DPIs, you have prepared some, and I see over there and there in the middle. Thank you. So we do not have much time. Let us collect the questions first. I will mark them down, and then the panelists can address the questions. If you have specific panelists to address the question to, Please note this. If not, we'll just take it on a voluntary basis.
Thank you so much for an extremely enriching discussion. I'm Aishwarya from India. My question is around the ways in which countries that have gathered here today under the Jakarta Futures Forum Aegis, how can they leverage DPI for green transitions? Do you have any examples of case studies from your countries or other countries that you have studied where DPIs have been leveraged for green transitions? Keen to hear your views. Thank you.
I'm from Sri Lanka, representing the Data Protection Authority, newly established Data Protection Authority. Actually, my question is especially for Mr. Kamdani. So you are representing the Employers Association. What are the challenges you encounter when this digitalization journey, especially in the context of employer-employee relations? Thank you.
I see one more question, so let's take the third, and then we'll go back to the panel.
Hello, my name is Basant Hasim. I'm from Egypt. My question is related to the cybersecurity aspect of emerging technologies and a resilient internet infrastructure. So I was wondering if there is a cooperative framework between the countries here, Singapore, India, and Indonesia, on having a cybersecurity cooperation between them. And if so, is there a multi-stakeholder approach in this kind of cooperative framework? It's not only the government, but also the private sector and civil society.
Thank you very much. If I may start with Johannes, because the question was addressed directly to you, and then we'll open with the two questions to the audience, to our panelists. So data protection challenges in Indonesia. Yeah,
So in regards to employee-employer relations and the advance of technologies, I think there's always a tension, from the industrial age and, moving from heavy hand labor into machine labor into now AI-empowered automation. There's always a tension between employers and employees. Employers seeking to find the most efficient way with executors who complain the least and are paid less versus employees are looking out for their own welfare and continuous employment. So in Indonesia, we have seen tension. I think there's always a question about what is this new AI age going to mean for me as an employee? And our responsibility in Indonesia is to educate employees about two things. One, how to upskill yourself, how to remain relevant in an age where routine and mundane and simple tasks can be automated. And secondly, also, to make sure that we take care of those people that are really, in Indonesia, what we call 3T areas. So areas that are far away from central cities, that are destitute and left behind. So they require extra care. So yes, of course there is tension, but we have a responsibility to both educate and directly intervene should there be those who cannot upskill themselves. And I think through a combination of these two actions, which is both concerted between private sector and with the government, we should be able to take care of those concerns. And I'm optimistic that the use of AI, which is the hot word on everyone's lips right now, is going to be more towards good than bad.
Thank you very much. We're running out of time, so we need to address the two questions very briefly, and this will be also your concluding remarks as panelists of the first session today. The first question was about green transition and leveraging ways of DPIs for a speeding green transition, and the second was about cooperative frameworks and cooperation, multi-stakeholder cooperation in particular. So if you can have 1 minute remark, speaker by speaker, to conclude this panel, that would be just wonderful. Thank you so much. Let's start with all.
So I think on the first one, on the green, is an excellent question. ESG, how you connect ESG initiative, green initiative with DPI. There are some starting, but this is really the big opportunity, I guess, now, right? How can startup build on that? On carbon credit, for example, on tax rebate. So you can get access and can see. So early stage, I would say, but huge opportunity. And I think great idea for people in the room, right, to start working on this.
Right. So I agree with Olivier that it kind of represents a new kind of horizon for DPIs to explore. And in terms of multi-stakeholderism, I do believe that's crucially important, particularly when we have this learning, the technology and the tools that that are a product of building DPIs, the experience of building DPIs. And I know for a fact that there are options being explored of DPI as a packaged solution that kind of accelerate DPI implementation and adoption in countries looking to build DPIs from scratch. So I think greater international collaboration, knowledge sharing, learning would perhaps be the key to kind of implementing DPIs at scale across different jurisdictions as they look to scale these capabilities as a means of socioeconomic growth going forward. Thank you.
In the interest of time, if it's okay, I'll touch on the cybersecurity question. So I think right now, there's a lot more collaboration across countries around sharing of certain data from a security perspective. I've spent a lot of time in kind of the digital asset world, so also touching on the cryptocurrency side. And what's been interesting is in that type of ecosystem is there's a cross-agreement, global cross-agreement where if a police entity anywhere around the world has some type of activity that they want to block, they will send out a digital message to all of the crypto exchanges that are registered within the broader entity, and they will automatically block those particular funds from having access into these exchanges, thereby making it a lot harder for transition of funds to move from country A to country B. And I think that is a good initiative where tying it back into DPI ecosystem, if you're able to have a cross-border collaboration between different countries and sharing certain information, if you need to act urgently to prevent certain information from accessing country A to country B, or you want to further allow information to be spread across different regions, it can be done in a very fast, efficient manner if you have this centralized cross-border agreements as to how different DPI infrastructures actually talk and communicate with each other.
To touch on your ESG point, I think the clear answer in Indonesia at least is no. DPI has not been focused on this. And the simple reason is because DPI deployment and implementation in Indonesia has really been focused on the fundamental human rights, right? Access to public services, access to government services, access to financial services and credit. But once those use cases are fulfilled and mature, I do believe that the next evolution should be connection of DPI to ESG. So thank you for the question, completely agree with that. On cybersecurity, India and Indonesia have always had warm and cordial relationship. Now, through successive G and B20 presidencies, we have always continued to thread on cybersecurity and the need for a common standard and increased communication both on G2G and B2G level, B2B level. However, right now between India and Indonesia, it happens much more on a case-to-case basis between relevant authorities. And agreeing with Mark, usually the first point where this happens is related to FS and FS-related crime. So beyond that, it's really just on an ad hoc basis. And again, more homework for us to get around to.
Thank you very much. And with these concluding remarks, I will just close this panel. Thank you very much to our speakers for the very important and inspiring discussion. Thank you to you, our audience, for preparing your questions and also being so ready in the morning to delve into DPIs and exploring their potential for future and green growth. And let's keep the conversation going today. Thank you.